You're listening to Unjiggered, a bartender podcast where we interview highly successful bartenders about their careers, lives, and the passion of bartending. This week we caught up with Chris Moore, director of Coupette in London and previously the head bartender of the Beaufort bar at the Savoy. We talk about the importance of managers as compared to head bartenders, the small roles that drinks really play in bars, and the challenge of opening a second bar at the Savoy. With this podcast, we want to peel back the mask and discover just how the greats really became the greats. So sit back and enjoy.
My name's Chris Moore. I'm the director of Coupette in Bethnal Green, formerly best known as the head bartender in the Beaufort bar at the Savoy. I've been in the industry for about 15 years, maybe a little bit more now, and basically done every job from the bottom to the top, and then finally got to open my own bar.
It's great to see you again, Chris. We haven't seen each other for ages, haven't we?
It's a long time, not since just before you moved to Singapore.
Yeah, actually, I had my leaving party at your bar.
You did,
yeah.
I remember. You brought along some of your spare bottles you had left over before you moved.
I know, right?
All the stuff you didn't want.
Classic bartender this drama when you move over, you have 50 kilos of booze you try to get rid of, right?
Well, I own a bar now, so I just get rid of it there.
How's Singapore so far?
Yeah, it's great. I'll tell you what I really like about it, actually, is the community. It seems to be really tight. You know, everyone knows everyone. It's very intimate. Everybody's very friendly. You know, couldn't ask for anything more.
It's a small, the city is relatively small in terms of like number of bars, but they're very close. People are very close to each other in terms of like how we help each other. I really like the scene. It was a good change from London because London is a bit more cutthroat, I think.
Yeah, 100%. Can you imagine having the WhatsApp group that you have here in London?
Yeah, no.
You know? Well, you kind of do. It's the LBA, but I can't be on that because it's just thousands of people. But you know, having that resource and being able to reach out to 300 bartenders at once and say, you know, I need this ingredient. We did it with fig leaves, and then I just sent you a message, and then, you know, they got it straight away.
Yeah.
But it's amazing.
Great. So you have had a very interesting career. So we'd like to cover some of the highlights. So first of all,
we can do the lowlights as well.
You can do the lowlights too. Where is it that you started bartending, or like what was the first time you approached this career?
The first time I stepped behind the bar was in an Indian restaurant / nightclub / bar on this random road in Coventry, which is where I'm from. And it was it used to formerly be a nightclub that was called Fatty Arbuckles. And then it got redeveloped and turned into this place. I think it was called Mirage. And that was the first time I got behind the bar, you know, and it was all spirits on optic and pulling pints.
Optic is that thing that you press to get. Is that the thing? Yeah?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it shows the levels that we started at. That you don't know what that is, and I'm very familiar with it. I love it actually. There's a pub called the Marksman in Hackney, where if you go there, they have really nice spirits on optic. So like, and I saw someone recently who had Chartreuse VEP on optic. It's, you know, but I quite like it. It's amazing because, I mean, you know, if you want to ensure cost control, pouring can't be off.
I'm sure those things they're awesome, and there's literally no way to use. I mean, I guess you can still mess it up, can you? I mean, I guess if you're too fast, no,
because it literally cuts it off. So like it will pour the amount, and that's it. It shuts off. So it's measured every single time.
Okay, so but like in between pours, so if you go like, say, I pour 25 ml, and then you're doing a double, right? And you can't be bothered to wait, and you pour before the bubble filled up again.
Yeah. You
but you must be pretty...
I mean, there's human error in everything, you know. There's always going to be someone. But, you know, it's pretty foolproof.
So, and it seems like a pretty weird place. I mean, you mentioned...
It's a random start. I mean, I tell you what it is I remember... As a teenager in Coventry, you know, we started going out reasonably early. But I always had this fascination with the people who were on the other side of the bar while you were on a night out. Like this interest, like the power they held over the night. Because the kind of venues we used to go to in Coventry weren't nice. Like they were high volume, they were packed, and they were serving terrible, well, not terrible stuff. Like, you know, you could always get a couple of nice spirits, but we weren't really interested in that. But they held the power because there were so many people waiting at the bar that could literally decide whether you have a good night or not. Because if you've got to wait half an hour for a drink, you know, while all your friends are off dancing and you're getting the round in, they can decide how quickly you get served. They've got the control over everything. And that was always a fascinating thing for me. And then when I first started, I was there, and I wasn't there for that long. I was there for a couple of months, and then I moved to another place that was called Chicago Rock Cafe, which was like imagine like a cheaper version of TGI Fridays, like a budget TGI Fridays. But it was super high volume, super intense. Like you worked, like it was a kind of a tight team there. But yeah, I was there for a few months. We used to have to wear bright yellow shirts and dance on the bar, and that was my formative training. And that's where I started a little bit of flair bartending, which is kind of a big part of my background as well. I loved it there, actually. It was like family, and one of my best friends I met there to this day, and then I'm godfather to his children, and I was best man at his wedding. So it was a big part of my life. We laugh at it now, but like at the time, it was what I wanted. Like I loved it,
To be honest, I think flair bartending is, we went through the phase, I think, about 5 to 10 years ago where it was slightly frowned upon. But I think most of the greatest started with that, right?
Yeah, 100%. I know that Argo Peroni used to flair many years ago. Yeah, absolutely. Marion used to flair. I think Alex did a bit as well.
Yeah.
You look at Declan Declan came from a flair background. It was a path that you went through because TGI Fridays and that style of bartending was a really fundamental way of learning the industry. If you were bartending in the late 90s or the early 2000s, it was the standard bearer because you learn how to pour, you learn how to host, you learn, cocktails at their basic level. But actually TGI Fridays has always had like martinis and old fashions and Manhattans on the menu, as well as having the kind of drinks that you think about it being associated with more, the ice cream drinks and things like that. So it's always had both sides to it. And it actually was I remember John Gakuru, who I don't know if you remember, but used to manage Lab, very well known. He's been in LA for a long time now, was Sergio Tiba Global Ambassador. He came from TGI Fridays, and he said, I remember my first New Year's Eve in the industry, I was at TGI Fridays, and the toilet got blocked, and I missed New Year's Eve. I missed midnight because I was unblocking the toilet.
Seriously?
Yeah, but
that's shit.
But if you want to be an operator and an owner, you'd better get used to that because that's the reality, But we do it for the love, not for the glamour. Although hopefully you get a bit of glamour sometimes, like getting flown to Singapore. But for me, it's that stage in Coventry, and the next place I moved to was a place called Prague, and it was set up as like a design bar in Coventry because that was the era of the design bar of the early 2000s. And that was again run by TGI Fridays bartenders, and they were really my formative years. That was the style that I came up with. And the biggest thing with that style of bartending was if you can get him to speak to him or her to speak to him, your job's done. Like you are facilitating people's nights out. And I think it was actually a really important learning curve for me. We had to kind of self-police the venue as well. Like, through the week there were no doormen. Coventry, like you'll have a fight every now and again. You've got to be the one that deals with it. It's a pretty steep learning curve when you're sort of 19 years old, to go through that. And it's really important.
I think also, to be fair, crowd management is such a unique skill that when we went through this sort of craft cocktail, I use the word craft very loosely, but craft cocktail scene, I think it's one of those skills that were lost, a little bit. I think not lost, but it's one of those things that people stop putting focus on.
I think there's a few skills like that that we've pulled back on as an industry, and that what I find now is that everyone wants to be a head bartender. Nobody wants to be a manager anymore. And actually the skills that and also every bartender I know wants to be an owner, but actually the skills in regards to being a manager are much more relevant to being an owner than being a head bartender. Most of the time when you're a head bartender, you don't have a lot of involvement in financials. You don't have a lot of involvement in running the venue. You're mostly focused on product. And something I talk about in my seminars and my talks now a lot is how actually 95% of the experience is not the drinks, because you can walk into a venue and the experience that you have before you even get your drink can make the drinks taste bad, because you will have decided before you even get your drink that it's not going to be good. If you walk in, the lights are wrong, the music's wrong, you don't get greeted properly, you don't get served efficiently, you don't get given water. It can be anything, and you will already have decided that you don't like the drink or you're not going to come back. And so actually being a manager, used to be the stepping stone. People used to go through the stages. They used to aspire to it. And now there's this almost roadblock where people don't want to take that step. They want to be the head bartender, but not do the next level above. And it's actually a bit of an issue in the industry. I think that we've got a real shortage of managers now.
I agree with you. I think, to be fair, there's merit to like a head bartender being a head bartender. Like, I mean,
There is, yeah.
there is, and I think it's a role that's very, very important. But I agree with you. I think the management side, I think, most of it is due to the fact that there is a lot of media coverage for bartenders nowadays. So if you want to look pretty on camera, bartending is the way, right? Like no one wants to video you filling up spreadsheet, right? So
No, of course, yeah. And that's it. But the other side of it is that not everybody is best suited to being a head bartender. There are some people that are better suited to being management, and actually make amazing leaders. But the second thing is that if there isn't anyone doing the spreadsheets, and if there isn't anyone taking on that role, then actually, the head bartender's life is going to be miserable.
Agreed.
So there has to be that balance, and there has to be, I think, a bit more recognition for that, and a bit more of a spotlight on that aspect of the industry. But yeah, I think that the issue is that we have, and I've talked about this a lot recently with my guys and with a few people in the industry, there's a big issue with money in our industry, in that you hit a ceiling in regards to what you can earn as a bartender, as front of house, guest facing, operations. And so what people actually do to kind of counteract that is they look for the glamour and they look for the recognition, because that can actually, if you can't earn any more money, then what you can do is you can get acknowledgement, and that can lead to more success, both personally and financially. And I think that's why people are staying in that role for longer now, whereas the traditional route was to go into management, where you would traditionally financially be rewarded more. But the whole acknowledgement system that we have in place now with things like Tales of the Cocktail and World's 50 Best Bars and the individual awards and competitions and things means that you can actually find that fulfillment in other ways now.
Yeah, no, I agree.
When I was at the Savoy, I remember speaking to Declan, actually. I remember saying to him that I always wanted to work behind the bar. I always wanted to be a bartender. And Declan said to me, I don't like that because it means that I have less control. And it was only really when I opened Coupette that really came to bear fruit, because I don't like being behind the bar because I feel trapped. It means that I can't adjust the music, I can't change the lights, I can't touch tables as I want to, I can't fluff cushions so I just have so much less control. And the thing is that I can still watch the bar and watch the drinks coming out, and I know whether they're correct or not based on just looking, because I've just been around for so long. But it's so much less influence that I have on the guest experience if I'm just behind the bar. Because also when you look at it, actually, what percentage of guests sit at the bar? It's not actually
minuscule.
Very many.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's maybe 10%, and then everybody else I can't access if I'm behind the bar. And, I've really, I'd say, evolved, especially in the last year, and learnt a lot more as an operator, and tried to be really self-critical and improve the experience and make sure that we're looking after guests as best we can and giving them the best possible experience in every aspect of the venue. And it's required a lot of growth from me because, it's not something that previously I'd looked at as much as I probably should have. And the reason why I talk about things like this now is because I want other people to learn from my mistakes, in that actually, what the venue and the experience and everything, we focus a lot on drinks, and, making great drinks is wonderful, but it's such a small part of the experience, because actually people would rather have a cold beer in a great venue than have a good drink in a really terrible venue. It's that simple. If the room and everything else isn't right, they just won't stay. They won't care about your drinks. Doesn't matter how good your drinks are.
So let's go back to your beginnings.
My path.
So we're still in Coventry at this stage.
We are.
At some point you must have started to eyeball London pretty hard, right?
No, not really. So the first time I came to London, as an adult, I came down for the Roadhouse Flair competition. But I came down as this wide-eyed 19-year-old bartender. And I came down for Roadhouse, but that was just a different world to me. I didn't really understand it. It was so big that I wouldn't even know where to start. And what actually happened was I was working at Coventry. I was working this place. There's a friend of mine working there too. And we decided that we were going to travel and see some cities in Europe together, with an eye to kind of, when you're 19, a lot of people talk about traveling, going off and traveling.
Oh, of course.
So we decided we'd do that, And so we both booked a week off, the holiday. And we went, of all places, we went to Ostend in Belgium, simply because her dad had a driver who was going there. And we were like, okay, well, we'll get in his van and go with him to Ostend. And so we spent a couple of days in Belgium.
How was that?
Days. It was fine. I don't really remember much about it because I think we went to Ostend for one night. And then we went to Brussels, I think, for 2 nights. All I remember is they've got that naked boy everywhere that's like a fountain that's peeing. Have you been there?
Oh, yeah. No, I haven't been.
It sounds
but yeah.
so weird when I say it, if you've got no point of reference to it, but that's just one of the things they're famous for.
Naked boys.
Yeah, you know, my kind of town. And we came back, and because we'd taken a week off and we'd only been gone for 3 days, we were like, well, we could go somewhere else. Where do we want to go? Like, you know, where's accessible? We've only got a couple of days, so we don't want to spend too much time traveling. And ironically, we decided we were going to go to Edinburgh. And we got the coach there, which is like a 10-hour coach, 10.5-hour coach.
Beautiful.
Yeah. A lot of motorways as well, that beautiful English motorway. And it was freezing, like it was winter in Edinburgh. And winter in Edinburgh, if you've ever been there, the wind coming into the city, like it just cuts you like a knife. But you know, we started looking around the bars, and it was very clear that the bars were at a much higher level than we were used to. And it was exciting. Like it was like discovering something. We just loved the city. Edinburgh's beautiful. Like it's a really beautiful kind of landscape. You've got a lot of old architecture. And you know, growing up in Coventry is just like 1950s cement buildings.
Okay.
And so for me, this was just like a beautiful place, you know. And we were out, and she said to me, "Why don't we get jobs here?" And I was like, "What?" You know, like terrified. Like, how are we going to do that? And she was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And I was like, "Well, okay." And so we just went into bars and we talked to bartenders, and they'd recommend a place or something, and we'd go there and we'd say, are you hiring? Do you need anyone? And the next day...
But you still had a job
Yeah.
back in Coventry.
Yeah. But, you know, forget that. I mean, you're talking about a job at this period in the industry. This was like 2004, where you'd be getting paid maybe... I think the job in Coventry, I was getting paid £4.50 an hour.
Oh, that's brutal.
Yeah, but that's just how it was back then, you know. So I mean, I didn't have a lot of kind of
Nothing to lose. Yeah.
And so we got 2 interviews the next day, and I remember the living room in Edinburgh, and I remember that again the bar manager was a guy called Dave, and I think he offered us the jobs on the spot.
Oh,
like at the end of the interview, and so we offered the job in the living room, and we both accepted, and then. When we went back to Coventry, I remember my friend, she was actually moving. She used to live in the US, and she was going to move back there in about 6 months. And she was like, "I don't think there's any point in me moving to Edinburgh and then moving back to the US." And I was like, "Okay, well, I probably won't go as well then." And then I remember speaking to my mum. My mum was like, "I think you should go." And so I literally got like, I went off to Edinburgh on the coach again, 10 hours. And I remember I had like £5 in my pocket, and my mum had given me a check for £100. But like checks, especially back then, they didn't clear for at least a week. So I basically had like a £5 to live on. I had nowhere to live, like nothing sorted. I went to Edinburgh with a suitcase, and I used to leave it in the living room, in the cloakroom, every night. And I just used to go to work every day and just hope that I found a sofa to sleep on. So I remember sleeping on people's sofas. I remember sleeping one night in a parked camper van on the street. And I just did it for a few weeks until I managed to get on my feet. And that was the gamble. And I was earning £4.65 an hour, So, and it's just one of those things where I don't even think it was brave. I just think it was naive. Like I just didn't understand what I was getting into, and I just made it work. Like I just made it happen. And I think sometimes you have to do those things, but looking back on it, that changed my life, because the living room was just around the corner from Tonic, and at the time, like Tonic had some really well-known bartenders, and then you had Rick's as well, which had people like Jamie McDonald and Jim Wrigley working there, and you had Stu McCluskey was working up a place called Dragonfly, managing that, and then there was Jason Scott and Mike Aikman, who later on opened Bramble, and there were really, really like influential, important people up in Edinburgh then. It was a bit like Singapore, actually. It reminds me of it. It was a very tight community.
This is already 2005 or so?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So, bounced around quite a bit, which was kind of the way it was back then. You generally went into bars and you'd work there for 6 months and move on. It was just sort of accepted as norm.
I tried different places.
Yeah, and I think it was trying to find what best fit you as well. I think that was just a thing in the industry, was it was considered, because the pay wasn't great, it was very fast and loose, and it was about finding what you really enjoyed and seeing where you thought you could progress. So it was a very different style now, to where you're expected to have stability and to bounce around less, and to really hold on to something, commit to it, which is actually, it's a very positive thing, because it shows that the industry has progressed in terms of professionalism. It's a big change. But it was also more party-led back then, Like bartender, there's the old thing about bartenders getting paid and getting laid. That was the whole aim. But also that led to very short careers, because there's only so long you can do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was working in the living room. I have to say, it absolutely was not for me, and I really didn't enjoy it. And after a few months, I was ready to leave, and I was just like, well, I'm going to leave and go back to Coventry, basically like give up. And I went around the corner to Tonic, and I remember the bar manager there was a guy called Will. I used to call him Buff. And I went in there and I got a drink and whatever, and Will said to me, how's it going? And I said, well, I've kind of not enjoying it, the living room, I'm going to go back home. And he said, well, Sarah's leaving. Sarah was the other bartender there, so do you want to work here? And I was like, yeah. Like, it was my favorite bar. I remember the moment where I decided that I wanted to be a bartender was I went into Tonic, and Sam Kershaw made me an old-fashioned. Okay. And I was like, I want to be able to do that. And so he, offered me the job, and I was like, right, I'm staying. That's it. And I think I was on £5.50 an hour.
Wow.
85p or whatever it is increase. It's massive.
Sam has been around for a while as well, isn't he?
Long time, yeah.
Because if he was bartending back then, he must have started in the early 2000s, right?
Yeah.
How old is he now?
He's 40, just turned 40, just had his birthday. So he was... I remember him telling me, he started out in a hotel and just ended up bartending kind of almost by accident, because he took an interest in it, and then he was making margaritas and things, and people were like, "Wow, what's this?"
Lime.
You got to remember, back then. So Sam was 26 when we were working together. That was still like making decent classics was really not that common. Across the UK.
No, it wasn't a thing. Like, we're talking about, 2004, 5?
Yeah.
It wasn't a thing.
No.
Absolutely not.
It was, it started in the 90s, and Dick Bradsell was the hero, and then back then you got Milk and Honey was kind of on the scene. Milk and Honey was the place. Like, you read about Milk and Honey, like it was like the myth, the legend sort of thing. It was just like completely unattainable. You couldn't imagine going there, let alone having contact with these guys and things. And Milk and Honey had just come to London as well.
But what was the crazy thing about Milk and Honey is that you talk to people like we were talking to Jimmy and recently on this podcast, and some of the elements that he took from his experience in Milk and Honey, you're still dissecting them like decades after.
Oh, it's
and you
crazy.
think like, this guy thought about it 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's insane, and I only ever had one conversation with Sasha, and it was in the American bar, actually. And it was just one of the most effortlessly thoughtful conversations I've ever had, because it's like he was 3 steps ahead of you on everything, and it's subtle touches. It's kind of things that I've really tried to integrate into my thoughts on the industry in terms of, I talk about a factor of, wow, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's insane. Just things like he was really excited. I remember he was going to bartend for the first time in 10 years again, and I can't remember the name of the place that he was opening. It was a small place, and he was talking about how every table was going to have its own water tap, just so that people, if they were drinking water faster, then they could have easy access to more water, so they could make sure they were hydrated, and having a camera above every table just so that he could monitor service and monitor the way that people drank so that he could improve the service, rather than it being like a security thing. It's just little tiny touches that aren't necessary. You don't have to do it, but why wouldn't you?
But you know what? This makes you think about how much he focused on the actual experience, and how much he understood that drinks were just a part of a puzzle, of a much larger puzzle,
It's creating an illusion, The big thing for me is the difference between bars and restaurants, which is another subject that I talk about a lot now, is that restaurants are largely about product. Like, people really go there for the food. Now, restaurants tend to be very, very, certainly the what are considered to be the top restaurants in the world, they tend to be very clean, kind of neutral environments. You get party restaurants as well, which are a bit more stimulating in terms of the ambience. But most of the ones that are considered the best tend to be very subtle You generally don't see the kitchen in those dining rooms. They tend to be quite plain, quite clean, quite elegant, and everything is about the plate. Because even in those restaurants, mostly you're drinking wine, which wine is beautiful. I love wine, but it's not visually a stimulating thing. So bars are about the way they make you feel. And that's the difference. Because bars are about the atmosphere. They're about soul. That's what bars are about. They're about escapism. They're about forgetting about everything that's on the other side of the front door. Getting away from the world and being enveloped and encased in this sort of fantasy make-believe world. That's what they are, and that's what he created. All those little touches in Milk and Honey, like you have to knock on the door, like you can't just walk in, and then you get greeted by this bartender that looks like he's from another era, and he guides you to a seat, and you just kind of caressed through the whole experience and made to feel like you've been transported. And that's really what you're always trying to achieve in any venue that's serving drinks. The drinks are kind of an accessory to everything else. And this is where I keep talking about and coming back to what a small part of the experience the drinks are, and how much emphasis as bartenders we put on that actually is completely disproportionate to everything else. And I think that, when you work in hotels, because so much of that is taken care of for you, you have a lot of staff, you have an environment that's probably very expensive. You couldn't ever create that in an independent bar. You might have live music and things, which not all independent bars can offer because of space and money. So you can focus a lot on the product and on just talking to guests. But the amount of effort from an independent bar owner's point of view that goes into that, when you haven't got all of those resources and you haven't got 15 people thinking about those things for you, is just massive. And that's really the big change between being a head bartender, especially in a hotel, and then moving into being an operator.
So I'm very curious to hear, because we're quite far from it, but how did you manage to land a job at the Beaufort bar?
So that came about a little bit randomly, actually. So I was working back in a place, back near home. So this is after Tonic, it's a few years later. And the guy that owned the bar, he went on a trip to Ardbeg, and he went there with Daniel, who Daniel Bernreuter. Mm-hmm. And so Daniel was the manager of Claridge's at the time. And so we used to come to London quite often from this place I was working. And so I got introduced to Daniel, met him in Claridge's. At the time, I had kind of indie hair and tatty jeans and stuff. It was a very late 2000s sort of thing. Yeah, sort of nasty look. Yeah, you look back and you're like, what was I thinking? That's my period of that, is looking back and what Facebook was I doing? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because Facebook was just coming in then as well. So those early photos have disappeared now, but not entirely, to be honest. And so I got introduced to Daniel, and I remember seeing when the Savoy was reopening, they were looking for bartenders in the American bar. And so I thought, I'll drop him a message. So I dropped him a message and said, look, I'd like to apply. Is that okay with you? Because I don't want to, waste my time, or if you think I'm not right, then it's fine. But I just thought I'd ask. And so I went in for my first interview, which was an HR interview. I then met with the Beaufort bar manager, who was Shannon. And she was interviewing me, and then the assistant F&B director came to interview me as well. So this is I had 6 interviews in one day. And he said to me...
Classic Savoy style.
Exactly. Yeah. And so he said to me, we were talking, I was like, I don't really understand this role, this new bar that I seem to be getting interviewed for, but it's not what I applied for. And he's like, yeah, we think you'd be really good for it. And I said, well, okay, I'm not sure what I want, whether I want that or just a bartender's job. And I was kind of at a time in the industry where I sort of wanted to go back to bartending rather than having seniority. But I was just sort of pushed down that road a little bit. And I was, in the end, I was quite happy about it, because I thought it afforded me more options, more flexibility to kind of do what I wanted. And then obviously they set up an appointment for me to come back and meet general manager, who was Mr. McDonald. And I remember, so I went for the final interview that day, which was in Simpson's in Knight's Bar. And I went up to the bar, and Daniel and Shannon had met me and took me up there. And so we were sat down upstairs, and then Mr. McDonald came in. And so Shannon and Daniel both got up to leave. And then Mr. McDonald said, no, Daniel, you stay with us. I don't know why. I think maybe he was trying to throw us off or something.
He's a weird cookie.
Yeah. I just think he was trying to catch us out almost. And Daniel even looked flustered and was just like, what's going on? Why? And so we sat down, and I always remember the first thing he said to me. And he had my CV in his hand. And he said to me, you know, Chris, everybody tells me you're great. He said, but I look at this and I don't see it. So what do you think about that? And it just made me laugh. And I just said, well, yeah, I get that. Coming from someone who's like the general manager of the Savoy, I can imagine my CV doesn't impress you, you know? And I think that just kind of built rapport just because I was honest with him, and it didn't kind of fluster me because, yeah, he's right. And yeah, it just built a rapport and a relationship. And then I ended up getting offered the job. And I think it was July, and we were all coming in for induction on the 13th of September. It's a date that always sticks in my mind. We did induction from the 13th of September. We opened the hotel on the 10th of October. And yeah, I had just over a month before we started. They asked us to come in a week earlier, and I said, look, I'm not really ready. And so we went into induction. There were 250 people in induction. I remember in my induction group was Salim, which was ironic, you know, because Salim was the head bartender in the American bar. He worked there from 1967 until the hotel closed, and then we did induction together. And Swanee as well, who was bartender in the American bar, was in my group. And, you know, it's funny, like it's a big corporate thing, so there's a lot of role play and stuff like that. But I think because there were so many people, like it was good fun. You know, we were coming in every day at like 8:30 in the morning, spending all day together, getting to know people from different departments, and going through that, like, it's a very special time. You know, I remember the night before we opened the hotel, I think I was the only person. There was me, Shannon, Daniel, and the assistant managers. So it was Francesco and a guy called Charlie, who were the only people there from the bars, because we'd basically had a disaster in terms of setup. Like, things just weren't organized properly. I was just panicked. It was like they got people from other departments to come in and have like an experience.
These role play things.
It's like a test run, like a practice. And our last one of those was a disaster, absolute disaster. The drinks were way too complicated. There'd been the consultancy group that did them, and it was. And I remember about 10 minutes in to this 2-hour session, Jill, who was our bartender, cut her finger, and it just collapsed. It was awful. And I remember I said to Shannon, "I'm really worried. Like this is not good." And she said to me, "Okay, but don't panic, because if you panic, then I'll panic." And I thought, right, I need to fix this then.
But how many dry runs have you had before?
We had I think only one before that, and then that was the second one. We were, I think the hotel was opening. I think it was a Monday. And I remember that it was kind of like told to us that when the hotel opened, that it would be very much controlled in terms of the numbers of people that would be allowed inside. And the Monday came, and about 11 o'clock in the morning, the operations director came into the Beaufort bar and was like, "The American bar need help," like kind of panicking a bit. And I was like, okay. And I went up to the American bar and it was full. And I went to Daniel and was like, you know, Mr. McGrath said, "You need help?" And he was like, "No, we're fine." And I was like, looking at the lobby and looking at the Thames foyer and looking at the restaurant and thinking, they're not controlling anything. Nothing is controlled here. And it just made me like my heart just sank. I was like, right, okay, now we're in it. And so just worked to kind of make it as best fit. And I just remember we opened the doors at 5 p.m. and just everything was a bit loose, and it was kind of, because it was the same for the hosts. Even on the door, we're just like, what do we do? There's like 300 people trying to come into the bar. Like, you know, delivering all of this was just unexpected. And so we just had to kill ourselves and work hard just to get through it. And finding our identity as well, because the American bar has a very clear identity. Like, you know what you're expecting when you go there. It was very, very classic, like basic classics focused when it reopened. So it was easy to deliver, you know. They already had a system in place, while the bar, when they reopened, was a nightmare because it was so old. But in terms of a structure of how service works, that was all organized, and it was all, you know, very easy for the bartenders and the servers to understand what they were trying to deliver. So it found its flow quite quickly, whereas the Beaufort bar didn't have an identity really. It was opened as a champagne bar, you know, where the idea was, they had this idea for the Beaufort bar where everyone would be sitting around sipping Dom Perignon, and literally the bar would just make the occasional gin and tonic. And we opened, and within the first week we were doing 350 cocktails a night from this, you remember the station, tiny station, really hard workspace to implement delivering that sort of volume. And so we just had to adapt so fast and constantly change to find our feet and find, the right team and the right offer that would work in that space. So it took a while, And I remember speaking to Argo, and he said, it took us 2 years to sort our back of house just to get it organized. And we were the same, really. It took 2 years. After 3 years, we were running smoothly. And then we kind of found our identity probably about the same. It took about 3 years, really, to find what we wanted to do and how we wanted to deliver the experience as well.
But I think that's the main challenge with having a bar in a building that has the American bar in it.
Yeah, of course.
I think it's a huge challenge. And as you mentioned, I think which I think it was a challenge as well at the time, but like to reopen the American bar and make sure that you stay true to what the American bar is, but meanwhile you also deliver something that is relevant to today's market. I think that's a challenge within that specific ecosystem. But I think to open a bar in the same building and get it to work, and get people to perceive it as a legitimate bar,
you're 20 yards away from the world's most famous bar.
Yeah, it's very difficult.
How do you make it relevant?
Absolutely.
And so for me, the most important thing, and I was almost over aggressive on it, but I had to be, was we don't want any crossover. And we have to have our own identity. We have to. It almost has to be like, in a nice way, it has to be like, well, fuck them. Like in a nice way. And I mean that in the nicest way, because obviously we had a good relationship and everything with all the bartenders and we got on well. But you have to be like that, because if you're like, oh, well, we're all nice together, what they're doing is great. No, you have to have a competitive edge. You have to say, like, we want to beat them, which is almost an impossible task. It's very, very close to being an impossible task. But I'm just really stubborn. And so I just stuck to it. And, I killed myself to make that bar as good as I could possibly make it. And we ended up with a team which was actually incredible at one point. It really was, like, from in every role. There was myself and Lorenzo and Fabrizio, the biggest character in every room, and Andrea, and then we had we had Neil Donachie, we had Vitek, who went to work at Artesian as a barback. We had Paula, your sister, on the floor. We had
Thank
Danny,
you for dropping that in there.
Of course. We had Danny, Australian girl. We had Will, who ended up being assistant manager in the American bar, working as a server. We had Shannon, who's his partner. They've been together for a while now. We had an amazing team, and it really was front to back. It was incredible.
Yeah, Joe Schofield as well.
We had Joe Schofield.
I mean, that's a mega team.
I forgot about Joe Schofield. Yeah, that's how big that team is. It's crazy.
I mean, once you put it down on a piece of paper, you realize that the team was actually incredible.
It was unbelievable, and it's one of the very few times in my career where I knew that I could place faith in every single person who was in, because we all work in great teams, but there's some elements that you're always going to be weak in, and with that team, because that team as an entity only lasted really for 6 months. And I remember, I think it was Danny that was leaving, and it was just a life choice. She wanted to go and travel and see some things. But I remembered being a little bit devastated about it, because I was like, that team's so perfect. And it was 6 months of just like, this is incredible. That it was just the first one to drop off. It was like, damn, how do you, I can't imagine replacing any of these people. Like it was perfect from back to front. And we had the pop-up menu, and we had that kind of momentum, and we'd done well at Tales of the Cocktail, and it was a really big deal, because it was finally getting to where you really want a bar to be. And just to lose that one person was actually really important.
How did you come up with the idea of the pop-up menu?
I need to remind myself now. I used to have a spiel for this question.
We don't need the exact spiel, more of the gist of it. Don't worry about it.
We had a bit of a story, because the Savoy produced a pop-up brochure years ago. I've got a copy, and we used to keep it in the bar. And so we used to say that was part of the reason, but actually I found that after we thought about the pop-up menu. And it was literally, I'd wanted to do something with illustrations from the Savoy archives for a while, because the restaurant menus used to commission illustrations for them. And so, I got to see a lot of them, and I thought they were amazing. And I thought we kind of need to do something with this. And I always kind of pitched the Beaufort bar as being a bit more fun, than the American bar, a bit more light-hearted. You know, the American bar is very classic. Not that it wasn't fun, but it is very classic in style.
Indeed.
You know, it's a big focus on elegance, and so we wanted to have be a bit more playful with what we did. And it was almost about literally bringing the menu to life. And it was a ridiculous idea. And I didn't even know if it was possible. That was the thing. And I remember Daniel came one day, as he used to do, and kind of marched into the bar and was like, you know, he'd asked me for kind of the direction that I wanted to take the bar in and what we were going to do, the activity. And I remember he came in this one day and he was like, right, I asked you for this like 3 weeks ago. You need to tell me now, because this afternoon I've got a budget meeting where if we don't allocate the budget, the Beaufort bar's doing nothing for the next year. And I was like, well, I've got this thing, but I just don't want to tell you because I've not done the research on it properly. And he said, well, if you don't tell me it now, it's not going to happen because you won't get the money for it. And I was like, okay, well, I want to do a pop-up menu. And he just went, this is a podcast, so you can't see my face, but he just sort of tilted his head and stuck his bottom lip out and went, okay. And I was like, right then. And he must have thought that like I'd had a breakdown or something. And but yeah, he went and pitched and got the money. And this was not a small amount of money or a small project. And you know, you forget because by that point I think it was 2013. This ended up being a £35,000 menu, or closer to £40,000 by the time we finished everything. But he went and got the money. And then I had to find out how we were actually going to do this because I'd never done anything like it before. And the research showed you that the basic structure of making anything which is pop-up is you need illustrations in the first place, but they have to be drawn in a very particular way. You need a paper engineer, which was a job that I didn't know existed. You know, I've never met a paper engineer before. And then you needed someone to actually print and bind and assemble the pop-up books, which is not a simple or a cheap process. And so I just had to start researching it and working out what the process was going to be. And I remember a couple of years before that, I was trying to think about illustrations that I'd seen that had impressed me. And the one that I could remember was there was a tube advertisement, and it was for this book. And I was like, I remember the cover of that book as being very impressive. It was called The Thousand Autumns of Jacob de Zoet. Apparently it's a very good book. I started reading it and I'm just clearly not intelligent enough to kind of comprehend what's going on. So I just basically looked up who created that illustration. It was a guy called Joe Wilson, who just turned out to be the most incredibly talented illustrator. Amazing at what he does. And so I spoke to him, I just got in touch with him, and I remember the title of the email that I sent him was, "This is really random, but I want to create," and then just underneath it was like, "Hi, but you know, I want to create a pop-up cocktail menu. You know, I've never seen it before. I don't know how we're going to do it, but do you want to chat?"
Yeah.
and so he got back to me and said, "Yeah." And while we were talking, he said, "I actually know a paper engineer." He said, there's a woman called Helen Friel. So he said, you know, I saw her do these pieces, and it was like little fairground pieces where she created like amazingly realistic fairgrounds all out of paper, where like the rides would spin and you'd get, you know, the like swings and things, and they were all made out of paper, but they worked. And I think that she could be really good for this. And I was like, okay, well, let's meet and have a chat. And so we did. And then we had to find a printer, and I found this company that just seemed to fit the bill. And we met with them, and I remember the guy, I just remember what he said. He said, we do all of our pop-ups in China. He said, because the women there have the most dexterous hands in the world. And he said, he said, for some reason, they are the place that makes the best pop-up books in the world, because they are the only ones that can assemble them as intricately as they need to be assembled. And I was like, this is a conversation I never thought I'd be having in my life.
Yeah, that sounds so weird.
Just so random. And so that's how it went down. And then we had to start working on the drinks, but we had to give a brief on everything we were going to do as well. So it was about how we worked in colors, you know, and how we worked in what the actual visuals were going to be. And we wanted a kind of image of the drink to be in every illustration. And so it was about how we were going to work that. So then it was just very much a collaborative process between myself and the illustrator to make sure we were getting the visuals that we wanted and making sure that we were representing the drink in the best possible way. So I might send over ideas for the illustration, and then he'd be like, no, that will work, that won't work. And so it was about variance because we really wanted to create a different visual for every drink. We wanted to create kind of the feeling of the drink before you got it. And it's a real talking point. It's big for us. The PR we got off the back of that was enormous. We were in the Wall Street Journal and things like that. Like it was global reaching for us. And guests used to love it. Like it was so big for them because it's such an evocative thing, because most people haven't seen a pop-up book since they were a kid. So to walk into a bar and to get given one is kind of like, wow, like this is, this is fun.
It's a surreal thing.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable that no one's ever done it before, right?
Well, apparently there was kind of a very, very different sort of scale. Someone had done something
along those
based
lines,
kind of on pop-ups in Sydney. And I'd never seen it. Like I tried to research pop-up menus or pop-up, and I couldn't find anything at all, apart from there was this like theme restaurant in Japan or something that had done like a restaurant menu where they had one pop-up in it or something, and I couldn't find anything else. But then after we did it, I got told that there was this bar that did something with like a pop-up. It was almost like a pop-up you had to assemble yourself or something.
Okay.
So very different kind of project.
So do you reckon the release of the pop-up menu was the pinnacle of your achievements in Beaufort Bar?
To be honest with you, I mean, speaking frankly, and it's weird speaking to someone from the American bar, formerly of the American bar, about this, but my pinnacle for me was winning Best Hotel Bar when we were nominated in the same category as the American bar. Because that for me was like acknowledgement of the fact that we'd reached the same level, and to be acknowledged by the industry as that was massive for me. Because, I remember saying to Daniel when the American bar won that award in 2011, I remember saying, I want us to do that. And that was my mission, essentially. That was my reason for everything we did in the Beaufort bar was we have to get to that level. We have to be acknowledged as being at that level. And so that for me was the culmination of 5 years of work, essentially.
Let's talk a little bit about legacy.
Yeah.
So you were very successful with your legacy campaign. Would you like to talk to us a little bit about how much went into it?
Yeah, I mean that was a massive part of my career as well, and that was really part of me trying to get the bar on a bigger stage. It was never really about me, to be honest with you. It was all about the bar, because I just had to find a way of getting the word out, And I'd been through a period where actually in the late 2000s. I was doing competitions and I did quite well, and I decided I didn't want to do competitions anymore. But then I was, it was like, well, how are we going to get the bar to the level it needs to be? And realistically, that was a route to getting the bar more recognized. It's still now. I was speaking to Connor, one of my bartenders, about it recently, and saying how, like, if you want to network and if you want to meet people and you want people to know who you are, then competitions is a way to do that. You can build your personal network, and it means people will come to the bar to see you, and so legacy for me was that, and I just don't think I knew what I was getting myself into at that point. But again, a bit naive. But apparently, when I do things that are naive, it turns out quite well sometimes. So Edinburgh, and then the pop-up menu, and legacy, and the thing for me through that year that really drove me was, can you imagine doing all of this and then not winning? Like that would just be devastating, like crushing. And so I pushed myself hard, and like I've said to you before, it was like a second job. And you just had to make sure you kept pushing, like every day, constantly thinking about it, obsessing, but trying to grow the bar at the same time. So it was a huge workload. Savoy were very supportive of me looking back on it. Very, very supportive. They gave me time off that didn't come out of my holiday when I was going through the competition. The events that they supported me in, things like Taste of London, which gained, a huge amount of traction. It was a big task, but, luckily we had the resources and the understanding that we could go and do something like that, because, it was almost Daniel's mission as well, was to promote the bar on the same level, to get that acknowledgement of having two bars at that level in a hotel is almost unheard of. And it was, you look back on it, I don't think we appreciated how big it was. I'd been in the industry for quite a while, but also boxing, actually, I used to box, taught me a lot of mental resilience, because it would have been easy to give up a couple of years in when, you saw how tough it was. And, back when we started, because it was a new hotel and all the systems weren't in place, and you get there's so many departments that you depend upon. There were things like when we opened, you used to have to requisition straws. But then the thing is, whenever you, as you know, try and purchase anything in a hotel, it has to get signed off by
50 million people. Yeah, I remember.
And so if someone goes on holiday for a week or 2 weeks, then it just sits there and you don't get it.
Yeah,
we can't talk about straws anymore because it's not sustainable. But back then, straws were okay. And, that's one small battle. But when you have 100 of those, it really builds up. And in those early days, everything was like that. Even like cleaning spray, we used to have to fight for it. And like I remember there was where the back of house used to store it, you could actually kind of reach into the cage and open the box and get them out without having to requisition it. And so we used to go and do that. But I remember Alex Cretena telling me at Artesian once, you just did what you had to do in hotels in those days, and he was telling me how they were running out of glasses, and so he got pulled into the office because they found a footprint on top of the bar in the other bar in the hotel, and they looked on the cameras, and it turned out that Alex had literally ran into the bar, jumped over the bar and put his foot on it, taken a load of glasses and ran back and out, and they were like, "You can't do that to another department," and he said, "But I'm just trying to meet our guests' expectations." Like he's trying to,
which is true. Like,
true.
Yeah,
like you used to be in a desperate state and going into the kitchen and trying to steal glasses from the restaurant because you had nothing to put a drink in.
Yeah, that's crazy.
You look back on it now, and like back then it was just what we did. But God, it was like mentally, it's challenging.
But like you mentioned resilience, and I think one of the big wake up calls that we had in American Bar is we had this barback, right? His name is Nereus. You know Nereus very well.
Nereus, yeah.
And this guy basically, like, he was supposed to start at 9 o'clock in the morning, and he was coming in at 5 a.m. So he could he could get all the prep done. And at the moment that you start thinking, I need to manage my barback in a way that he doesn't come in too early, because otherwise, I mean, that's surreal. Like,
that's the best problem to have.
I know, right?
We have a guy now, he's called Andre, and he's revolutionized what we do, but he's brilliant. So he was working at a place called the Head Bartender in Birmingham, which is a high-level bar. And he was also working as a chef as a Michelin star restaurant, but full-time in both. And he'll stay behind, after we've finished and we've cleaned and everything to do prep, and then he'll come in 3 hours before everyone else in the day, the next day. But the thing is, like, there's no drop in his performance front of house at all.
It's unbelievable,
and
yeah.
It's just that mental focus. Like, maybe I'm just getting old. Like, I can't do it anymore.
No.
It's tough. But it's that hunger. And again, like, you come back to boxers, and the big talk is about when people's hunger is gone. Floyd Mayweather, like, my favorite quote from him is, "It's really hard to wake up motivated when you wake up in silk pajamas in a mansion." Like, how do you keep on, that drive and that determination? Because you can do it for a while, and then you think, then it's just when you've got what you wanted. Yeah, it's when you've got what you wanted, it's like, well, do I do this forever? Or do you take a step back? And it's about managing your time then and balance, and actually your energy is probably best put into other things. So, I've stepped out of service a bit with Coupette now, because you get to a point where you can either work in a bar or run a bar. You can't really do both to the best of your ability. So for me now, it's more important to drive PR and to get the events that we do in the bar right. And, we've introduced live music, and we're trying to amp up the food offer. And, we do development Sundays now, and I want to do more with Calvados in the bar. So, but actually activating all of that is more important than me, being in service all the time. Like, I still want to be present and I want to be there, but I can't do both really well. And it's made a big difference, actually. Our revenues jumped in the last couple of months. And I really strongly believe that it's because I've taken a step back, and actually the team get more freedom. They get to express themselves more. They don't have me breathing down their neck all the time, and it's about passing that on and giving them the responsibility to take ownership, in the same way that other people did for us, like in the Savoy. Like, looking back on it, actually the freedom I had in the Beaufort bar was ridiculous.
Surreal. The freedom I had as a bartender in the American bar was surreal.
Mm-hmm.
I never had anyone coming to me checking recipes or quizzing me or checklisting me or anything like that.
Exactly.
It's surreal, yeah.
And you look back on it, you think, wow, but now it's my turn, and I probably wasn't as good as I should have been before. Well, it's not even probably. I wasn't as good at it as I should have been before, but now I'm trying to be better at it, because these people are talented and they deserve my trust. They've earned it, and they're killing it. They're actually killing it. And so for me to not be on them all the time like that is really important.
Why did you decide that you were ready to leave the Beaufort bar?
It came to a head, and I'll talk about it honestly because it's not a slight on anyone. But it came to a point where we did have a lot of success, and so you become more in demand, and you start doing more and more and more. And it really came to a head for me when I'd been traveling a lot. So I'd been lucky enough to be asked to do this work with Bacardi, with Legacy, where we went to pretty much every capital city in Europe to deliver a seminar on how to be successful in Legacy. And I was also doing other travel as well, and I was working full-time in the bar. And I did that for about 6 months. And I realized that I'd used all my holiday for the year in just a few months, because it was just really important, though, to capitalize on the success that we were getting with the Beaufort bar and to really drive it and make sure we were out there in the industry talking to people. So more and more people were getting to know us and getting to see what we did and to hear our philosophy on things. And so at one point I went to management and I said, look, I've used all my holiday for the year. I said, can I take some unpaid holiday so that I can keep on traveling to promote the bar? And they said no. And it had got to a point where I think it was in Switzerland, and I was starting to feel really physically bad. And in Switzerland, I was about half an hour into a presentation and my nose just started bleeding. And I was like, this isn't good. And that combined with them saying no to me taking unpaid holiday so that I could go and promote the bar, that was kind of my final straw, because I was like, if I'm going to push myself this hard to make this bar as successful as it can possibly be, and I'm saying I don't want you to pay me, I just need some days off when, everyone else is here. So I don't want to put the bar in difficulties. I'm not saying, oh, I want extra holiday. I'm just saying I want to work for the bar, just not in the bar for a few days. Can you facilitate that? And it just being a flat no, not even a conversation. I was like, if they don't care as much as I do, you have to question that at some point, And, you can kind of understand why at some point, but for me at that moment, I was putting so much in.
It did not make sense to you.
It didn't make sense. That was it. But yeah, being completely honest about it, because I feel like there's not enough honesty in these sort of issues in the industry. People kind of sugarcoat a lot of things when they leave places or when places close down or when things don't work out. After 5 years, it was like, well, if I've put that much in and I'm still putting it in and it doesn't mean as much to me as it does to someone else, maybe it's time to finish.
I see it. It's a tough decision, right? I think.
Of course, and the other thing is, everything you do in somewhere like the Savoy takes 2 years. So if you start a new project, so like I said before, the pop-up menu was 2 years, Legacy was 2 years. Like everything you do is 2 years. You're in 2 year cycles all the time. So if I'd have started a new project, it would have been 2 years for it to complete.
Before you could actually deliver it, yeah.
Exactly. And so then you were stuck in a cycle for another 2 years. And it was, do I want to stay for I've been here for 5 years already. Do I want to commit to 7, and then before you know it, it's 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, and you're a long way down the road. So I felt like at that moment it was the time to exit.
Were you immediately looking at opening your own bar, or did you think I need some time?
That was the focus. It was about how I would do it. Because again, it's a naive thing. Like I left and I had people who said to me, oh yeah, if you wanted to open your own bar, then this and this and this. And what you very quickly learn is that until someone's committed to it, like it means nothing.
Nothing, yeah.
You're talking to people who are drinking in a bar. So it's...
never trust people drinking
realistically.
in a bar.
So I went away and it was like, well, how am I going to do this? What do I want the bar to be? And I had this nucleus of an idea, but nothing fully formed. And so, I went on trips to France. I thought I had quite a bit of money in the bank that drained fast once I wasn't working, so I started working part-time a bit, and it was also good to keep my hand in with service. Just figured it out, essentially. And what ended up happening actually was the money for Coupette, I put some money in, but the money for Coupette came from people who I'd had an existing relationship with in the industry, just as it ended up happening. And it's quite an amazing thing. And we had a new investor who came in and took all of those people out of the business at the start of the year, just because he's the kind of investor who can take you to another level. And that's really what you need these days in the industry. You know, it's hard to make money in the bar industry as an owner, unless you have 10 sites, you know. It's tough because you have to reinvest so much money back into the business all the time. You know, it's ongoing with maintenance and with trying to improve your offer and, you know, menu changes and things. There's brand money that helps, but it's not everything, you know. And so if you really, the only point at which you can actually kind of really make money is when you cash out. You can earn enough money to live on, but you know, it's not like in other industries where if you're super successful, you can easily make millions. You know, the bar industry doesn't really have that. So having someone on board who can accelerate things and really, you know, drive things to another level is really important.
But do you think there is a huge disconnect in between what you think is the best bar and what actually is the most profitable bar?
100%.
Because I think a lot of people go into opening a bar thinking, okay, I'm going to open the best bar I can possibly do, like with the best drinks, the best service, best glassware and everything. And then you realize that that specific thing, A, is not scalable, B, does not make money.
Yeah.
You know, did you have some of that?
I always wanted a brand. That was the most important thing for me, was to create something that could be transferable and scalable. That was really important. So something that had an identity and was unique. Was very important to me. In terms of the product that we offered, I always wanted great drinks, always wanted amazing drinks, but I also wanted people who come for a beer to be able to get something, you know, great as well. So we've never offered draft beer. I'm probably going to change that soon in Coupette, actually, because I really want to make like amazing pecan beers and things like that, and a bit more brasserie style. I think it'd be fun. But you know, so when we opened, we had 5 beers. You know, and we had, 4 wines, 4 whites, 4 reds by the glass, rosé by the glass, 3 champagnes by the glass. We wanted to offer choice. And so it was really important to me that we were accessible. I talk a lot about, so our inspiration at Coupette is we're inspired by France, but proudly local. Because we always wanted to create a regular audience, you know, people, the kind of venue and space that people felt comfortable coming back to 3 or 4 days a week. And something I talk about in my seminars now is about how when you get those regulars, it feels like a night off. When you get those regulars sitting in front of you, it feels like you're not at work because you know them, you know their story, you know the football team they support, you know their family, you know where they live, you know everything about them. Like they're like a temporary friend because you never hang out outside of work, but you know when they're sat in front of you,
you know who they are.
And from both a business sense and a personal sense, it's the most important thing is that return business is what really will make your business successful. If people come back again and again and again, that's what you want to create. And it's something I talk about now is with football teams, is they're almost the best business possible because if you support a football team, you can't just decide one day that they've lost a match and you're going to support someone else. Like in terms of business, it's the most loyal customer you can possibly get because these people will die for their teams. It's amazing. You know, as bars, like, can you imagine that if it's like, no, I'm not going to any other bar ever again. I'm only ever going to this one. And there's a little bit of that we want to kind of capture and create is like a loyalty, like people buy into what you do. And the way people talk about that in like Black Pearl in Australia, and like I see it in like Le Lion in Hamburg, and it existed at Tonic, you know. But people have like their local pub as well, you know, that they really feel like they're a part, like it's their pub, you know. It's an amazing thing, and it's an element of that we wanted to capture with Coupette, so that people really felt comfortable, and no matter what they were getting in terms of product, that it was going to be great.
And how did you go about opening it? So you mentioned the fact that you managed to secure some investors. How difficult was it to find a site? Because it's one of the biggest challenges that we hear in London. And were you happy with the site? Have you ever considered moving?
So in London at that time, it was very competitive. Everyone was paying premiums, so key money. And so it was more, with the location, it was more about what you could get rather than choosing the perfect site. So it was about getting a site that could work rather than getting your dream site. So with Bethnal Green, what I felt was that there was very much a local element to that area, and that it had quite a strong bar offer already in place. Again, in hindsight, I was a little bit naive with how developed the area was in terms of the bar offering, because what you actually don't realize until you get into there is that those bars have had to work really hard to build up their clientele. And the second thing is that, about a year in, people started saying to me, the first 2 years was really hard. And then we found our feet. Like I speak to Andy. Who's one of the
You're 1 year in,
Yeah.
thinking, damn.
I've got another year. I was speaking to Andy from Sun Tavern. I was speaking to him a couple of weeks ago, and he was like, "No, man, it took us 3 years." And
It's a never-ending thing.
Sun Tavern's really like busy now, busy bar, and really works. But yeah, it took him 3 years to get to that point where it was like, right, now it's a proper business. Now we're good, because they have Discount Suit Company as well, which would just hit the ground running when they opened. It's a tiny little bar, but always been very successful. So you hear it in a lot of people who operate more than one bar, is that maybe you're losing money on one site but you're making money on the other, so it kind of balances out. And I don't know if that's what they had, but I'd imagine there was an element of that for them. But for us now, really, Coupette is now really finding its feet. So we had a few big issues with Coupette when we opened. We underestimated, because Coupette's a 5-floor building, we underestimated the issues that were existing in the flats that were above Coupette, which ended up costing us a lot of money and creating a lot of issues. We, at the start of this year, managed to renegotiate our lease with the landlord, so we got rid of the flats. So they took those back, and in return we halved our rent, which was just an enormous pressure off us, because apart from the financial pressure as well, like, we don't want to be landlords. Like, it's hard enough to run a bar, never mind to try and look after tenants and worry about renting out things and whatever, and maintaining the flats that someone else is living in. So that's a huge relief, huge pressure off. We also, when we opened Coupette, we had a fully fledged kitchen, and we had 3 chefs, which then again put so much pressure financially on the business. And so we ended up with this very expensive, like, high-end kitchen, which then we just weren't using, but we were still paying for, because everything was on finance. And again, like, that's all paid off now at the start of the year. So that removed thousands and thousands in costs at the start of this year. But the pressure it put on there, and naively we thought that we were going to be able to have like a lunch offer in Bethnal Green, and we thought we were going to be able to push out quite a lot of food. But because we're famous, like, people know me and they know Coupette for cocktails. That's what they know us for. And one of the things that I learned was that guests really like to be able to put you in a box. For guests, you have to make it as simple as possible. So what are you? And for now, we're a bar. We're a cocktail bar. Back then, we were trying to be everything. We were trying to do brunch, and we were trying to do coffee, and we were trying to do cocktails, and we were trying to do dinner, and we were trying to... And so people it confuses them. They need to be able to put a tag on you. So it's like, well, do I go there for dinner, or do I go there for drinks? Do I go there, before I go to another bar, or do I go there after, or do I go there in the middle? Or what?
Yeah, but also because the resources that you have are limited, like in terms of creativity, product, staff.
Yeah.
Either hire bartenders or you hire chefs.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can hire, you can hire both, but it's going to cost you a lot of money, and you need to be full. Yeah.
And it was, the thing is, actually, Coupette was very, very busy, but the problem was that the pressure that the cost of the chefs was putting on the business was enormous. We had 3 chefs, and the bar was really busy, but people were having the food as an accessory to the drinks, and so they just weren't justifying the money, like, nowhere near it. The wage cost of the kitchen, I think after the first 3 months was about 105%, which was just killing everything. And so we had a conversation about what we're going to, and again, I'm going to speak very honestly about it. We spoke with the investors as a group, and we said that we can't do this anymore. And I said, what we should do is we should lose 2 chefs, and we should just do a simple food offer from the kitchen that we can then, just maintain. We just do, so like at that point we were doing croque monsieurs, and the croque monsieurs were the biggest selling item on the menu, because they're easy, they're simple, they're quick, and they're bar food. And I said that we should just do that, and the investor that came from a restaurant background said, well, no, because if you're not doing it to the right standard, you'll ruin the brand. And we were like, well, okay. And he'd put the most money in, so it was like, we have to listen to him. But that, I think, was probably one of our biggest mistakes, actually, because the way people are drinking now, they don't want to go somewhere where you just drink, I don't believe. I think they want to be... Basically, what food does is it keeps them there longer.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we got rid of the chefs entirely, and then it was, the other extreme, which was people were then coming and were like, well, you've only got cheese and charcuterie. We wanted to have a sandwich while we have our drink. And so it's been a really tough balancing act over the 2 years. I feel like we've got it right now. We're elevating the food offer. We'll be elevating that in the next few weeks, which again, Andre, who's my little miracle worker who works too many hours and works too hard, but it's amazing. He's working on that because of his food background, and we've talked about what we're going to put in place. And I feel like it's really finding its feet. We've put in live music, and that's really grown things. And just in general, what you start to learn is that the bar needs to have a soul and an identity. And speaking to Jacob Briers about it, and he came in a few weeks ago, and he said, the place just looks so much better now. It looks complete, like it's got more atmosphere, feels great. And he was talking about how Dale DeGroff talks about how if you're going to have a bar, is like for it to kind of gain its identity and soul, it takes years, because basically what you end up doing with the bar is you end up filling it with crap, and that crap gives like that stuff on the walls and like the old rubbish that you put in the corner or whatever. That's what gives it more and more identity. It gives it layers over the years. So like one of my favorite bars in the world is McSorley's in New York. Have you been there?
Yeah, I've been there.
Love it. Like it's, light beer or dark beer, that's it. That's all you can drink. But the place is like, it feels like history. And it's just because for years they've been putting shit everywhere, and now it's full, there's no more room. And that's almost like, in a nice way, is what we've been doing with Coupette, is just filling out the space and fleshing it out and giving it character and identity. And it's really important.
How did you feel when you brought that plate home from Tales of the Cocktails with Coupette?
When people talk about how you spend so long building up to something and then you get it and it's almost like, well, what now? It was exactly that.
Seriously?
Exactly that. I find it very tough, and it's a flaw in my character. I find it very tough to be satisfied with anything. Like, for me, coming back from Tales of the Cocktail there was like, well, we didn't win Best Bar in the World. Like, that's what I'm like. That's the mentality I have. I'm never happy. Like, I always want more. I always want the next thing. And it's the same now. It's no different. Like, I try to be more content now. And to be honest with you, like, the awards matter less to me now. What I really want is to be successful in other ways. I want to really, I almost live through the staff these days, like seeing their success and seeing how much they're taking responsibility now and how much more autonomous they are and how much less they need me is what I'm really proud of now. But I'd still love to win that. I'd still love to win Best Bar in the World. So why not? Like, when I remember saying to the staff when we with the Beaufort bar, when we got, I think it was number 27, and the last time we did the world's 50 best bars list, I was like, that means there's 26 people who are better than us. I was like, when did you do anything to finish 27th? Like, I don't.
Yeah, no, true. It's very true.
And it's that mentality, which is, I can be very intense with those things, and I think one of my biggest attributes, but also my biggest downfalls, is that I'm very, very self-critical. So like, I will not put a drink on a menu until I am like happy, and it drives the guys crazy because we end up going to these ridiculous lengths to get ingredients and drinks right that we don't really have to, but I just can't look at the drink otherwise. It would piss me off in service. I'll look at this drink and I'll be like, that could be better. And so I'll keep on criticizing myself when I'm making drinks or when I'm giving service, and I'll even go home at night and I'll be beating myself up because I could have done one thing better for a table, And so when you start really looking at that and analyzing yourself and thinking that you could be better, when you finish 27th at something, you're like, that's not good. And it's hard because, a lot of people would kill them. Like, a lot of bartenders would kill just to be in 50 best bars list or just to win a plate at Tails. And I'm very grateful for it. And I really appreciate the fact that I've been able to go up on those stages and receive those awards. Like, it means a lot to me. But it actually now means a lot more to me to do things like I've done here, to be able to go and talk to people about what I do. That's the biggest privilege for me. That's what I really enjoy the most as a reward from this industry, is that I get to go to people and say, this is why the career that you've chosen is worthwhile. Mm-hmm. That's the thing that I believe more than anything, because at some point in your career, we're a very young industry generally. A lot of people leave the industry when they get to a certain age because they don't have an answer as to why they're doing what they're doing. And for me, years ago, I asked myself that question, and a lot of people don't. But the thing for me is, I really believe that as long as you're enriching people's lives, as long as you're bettering people's lives, it doesn't matter what you do. So that thing that people are looking for, that escapism, that getaway from their life, that moment of happiness that you can give to them, that's why I'm in this industry. Is that moment where you just make them, you make them smile. You make them light up. When people walk back in the bar and they feel like they're coming home, that's really my mission statement now for what I do.
That's very cool. I think we have talked quite a while. And
I've got
I think
a few more hours if you want.
I think it's a good thought to wrap this conversation.
Sure.
I have a last question I ask to everyone. If you could choose your very last drink, what would that be?
There's a drink, and Argo makes fun of me for it because there's a drink that I've been drinking. So back in like the 2000s, Argo used to work at a place called Montgomery Place, and I used to go down to London like most Sundays just to go to that bar. There was a drink on the menu they had called a tricolore.
Okay.
And it's gin, Fino sherry, limoncello, lemon juice, and vanilla sugar. I think there might have been one more thing in there. But he still makes it for me when I go to the Connaught. And so that would probably have to be the last drink that I would have.
That's really a cool drink, huh?
Yeah, it's nice, And the thing is, I've been drinking that drink for probably 12 years now, and I can't get it from anyone else or anywhere else. But it's funny that the Connaught's here now in Singapore at the same time I'm here, because the Connaught's always it's my favorite bar in the world, in terms of a cocktail bar. And I've been following, not in like a sycophantic way or like a worshipping way, but I've been following Argo for years now, and that drink's very sentimental to me.
That's awesome. I must have that next time I go to the Connaught then.
Yeah, if they've still got the vanilla sugar.
Thank you very much, Chris. It was awesome to talk to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We hope you enjoyed our interview with Chris. We are Unjiggered_media on Instagram, and you can follow our accounts at mmariotti89 for Michele, Alex J. Murphy for myself, and Adrian Bessa for Adrian. Thank you for listening.